Yes.
and people did not anticipate. So larger homes. Look at neighborhoods now. Look at political tribalism, which is growing unbelievable today in America, right? Red zone, blue zone, these are now mega brands. And people are self-sorting across America into these things. This is what's
Before you go further, I want you to though help the X generation in this room understand the millennials here, because the X generation was underprotected. And again, I was that stage. I was 1960, but I have the memories somewhere in my psyche, probably because it was recapped every year in those days, of Kennedy and the optimism of that time. Because I was 3 years old when it was happening. But I was raised by myself. I had to raise myself. I had to figure it out. So I had this optimism, but the pragmatism. But the way you raise your children usually as a whole is different, because since you were underprotected, that became baby on board. If you looked at movies in the 70s, babies were very different. They were like evil little bastards. Like it was Rosemary's Baby, right?
That's absolutely
It was
right.
The Omen. Yeah. It was, somebody's head twirling around The Exorcist. And suddenly it's 3 men and a baby on board. Talk a little bit about that transition and why millennials are the way they are, because they've done nothing wrong. They've just been raised differently.
The golden age of child as devil horror movies really lasted from about 1965 to about 1982. So exactly when Xers were small kids. I mean, that was the most negative image of small kids in American history. There were no G-rated movies. There was not even, you had to drive 500 miles just to find Benji. But my point was, so that was what was going on. And the phrase, you can do an Ngram search if you want, but the phrase, children are special, was literally no mention going all the way up through the late 60s, 1970 until about 1977, 78. No one ever wrote that phrase in a published work. So suddenly it began rising, and after 1982 or 3 with millennials, it just goes into the stratosphere, right? So suddenly millennials are surrounding these cuddly baby movies and these signs of baby on board and minivans with 12 different ways to buckle the precious kids into their seats. Back when Xers are small, you just told kids to do this. That was good enough. But so all of this has changed. But this shapes generations permanently. Here's the thing. Archaeologists know this. You can take a tree, you can cut the tree down, and you can look at the rings on a tree and look at the widths of the rings on a tree. And you can tell when that tree had, a really lush spring and summer, a lot of water, a little thin ring. That's when it went through the drought. We are all like that. We are all like trees. And very often, if you're a certain age, by the way, any tree you cut down all has the same kind of rings, right? It all has the same ring pattern because they all went through the same thing. So it's the same thing. Generations are like trees in that respect. And we all internalize. We have a record inside ourselves of when you went through these different seasons.
Yes.
But the big challenge is, again, I want to come back to this because this is a challenge of the crisis. You look around the world today. By the way, this isn't just America. Why is the whole world moving away from sort of individualistic liberal democracy where everyone's individual rights are protected? The whole world is moving toward populism, moving toward guarantees for the group. You talk to millennials, they want security, they want community. They don't want that rugged individualism that a lot of Xers, recall, right? It's a shift in perspective. And
they were also raised, there's a great book called The Coddling of America that if you haven't read it, you should also read, by Jonathan Haidt.
Haidt,
And he goes through and shows that it started with babies at that stage not only being taught you got to be safe every moment. Safety wasn't a question before, right? But now everything is about your safety and your security. And on the milk cans or the milk bottles that most people did for their cereal every morning was a child that was missing. They started that during that time. And they never told you the kids were found or that it was stolen by the father who's, just got the divorce. So all that was is constant fear and uncertainty. And then the constant piece, it magnified that when we got to the point of social media, when around 2010, all of a sudden everybody's got an iPhone, and now there's a different world where constantly they're being reinforced to be a certain way. Right? So it creates a radically different culture. But I want to plant a seed for the millennials right now, so you hear it. The millennials are our next heroes. They will, when we hit this next crisis, just like the flappers, the ones we talked about, great generation, I have great excitement for the millennials because they have a different level of relationship to technology, of networking. I'd like to make sure we talk about that. They're really going to be an important part of the solution.
But they also have a different relationship with each other.
True.
And that's the point. And that's how they differ from Xers. Millennials really get it. They believe in doing everything as a community, and they believe that people need a simple set of rules, prescriptions. Let's just follow the same rules. That way we avoid any of these problems. Let's just get everyone on the same page. And by the way, if a certain group of people refuses to be on the same page, and I was going to talk about this eventually, conflict.
Yes.
Let's have it out.
That's right.
Because it has to happen, it's going to happen.
Because if they see it as immoral or wrong. If you have a different point of
Right.
view, there's something wrong with you. It's not we have different points of view. My view is the way. Your point of view shouldn't be. There shouldn't be free speech. Who in their lifetime thought we'd be hearing that from liberals?
But
We're all about free speech.
But this is going on around the world. You
Yes.
look at, I don't know whether you're in everywhere around Xi Jinping in China, Narendra Modi in India. You go look at Abe Shinzo and sort of the transformation in Japan. But you look increasingly at Europe. Le Pen, unbelievably, she's probably one election away from winning in France. But my point is, all of these societies are becoming more populist around a kind of cultural, social center of gravity in the nation. No one really cares so much about the marginalized groups anymore. Everyone is focusing on the majoritarian center. Let's get the rules right for them so at least basic things work again. That's happening all around. And we sometimes think it's just America that has this problem. It's not. This generational pattern now increasingly involves much of the world.
And the ones that were raised that way, the older millennials are now around 40 years old. So they're the ones writing for the Washington Post and for the New York Times. They're the ones that are on television doing that. So they're entering positions of power and influence, and they're bringing the value systems that they've learned and grown up with to the world and expecting the rest of the world to be that way.
And by the way, just to point out, you saw the same thing happen during the 1920s. So you're right about the 1990s. While Xers were out enjoying, grunge and Nirvana and thrash metal and just doing all that stuff, it was totally transgressive, and the damaged font advertisements and everything was so Xer, right? Millennials were watching, Barney and his friends and, Blue's Clues. And they were going to this huge renaissance of Disney, movies, like Lion King and all that. So they were enjoying this very protected culture.